Hello everyone, my name is Prabhu Nepal and I'm joined by my teammates Pranav Gupta and Pulkit Anand for the presentation of our project Impact of Financial Dynamics on Performance and Competitive Balance of Athletes. So in this project, we will be analyzing the influence of finances on the performance and competitiveness of athletes in an individual level as well as a team level. Now, for this part, the first level is the individual level in which we have taken two research questions. First one is, does a higher market value correspond to better athlete performance? And second one is, does financial inequality reduce competitive balance? We have marked these as H1A and H2A, and we have also defined the corresponding null hypothesis for the same. Next up is the methodology and dataset that we have used. So to test this, we have constructed a multi-sport dataset from football, cricket, tennis, chess, because of the viewership and prize pool. Because more views equals to more money, and as well as growing titles in esports such as League of Legends and Counter-Strike, which have a huge prize pool and watching. Similarly, along the same lines, we have taken key variables as market value, normalized performance index, competitive index, and various other performance metrics that we calculated from the dataset we got from each sport. Our methodology included group comparison, statistical analysis, sport level evaluation, and Monte Carlo simulations to understand deeper structural effects. So, hypothesis one. So here, because of the data set, as I mentioned, this is the data set that we have taken, and high value versus low value athletes. Basically, high value and low value corresponding to the top and bottom 25% of the total athletes in our grouped data set. So what we observe is a clear upward shift in performance for high value athletes. So this supports our first hypothesis that financial valuation is possibly associated with performance. Next up, we have the residual nuisance, where we know that the relationship is not perfectly deterministic, which is explicitly understood by the graph. Similarly, residual based metrics show weaker separation, meaning some lower value athletes still outperform expectations. So while value matters, it is not the only factor driving performance. And financial equality versus competitive balance. Now we examine how financial inequality affects competitive balance, and we can see from the graph that across sports, higher financial dispersion tends to align with weaker competitive balance. This provides structural support for our second hypothesis. And finally, we have the Monte Carlo evidence, where to further evaluate and further study our hypothesis, we use Monte Carlo simulations, and under equal conditions, competition remains uncertain. But when outcomes are financially weighted, entropy decreases, meaning results become more predictable. This confirms that financial inequality reduces fairness in competition. And I give it now over to my teammate for the continuation.
Now we move on to testing a second hypothesis in whether greater financial disparity between teams leads to less competitive leagues. We start our analysis by searching for a correlation using a spearmint coefficient, where we compare the ranks of their win percentages and ranks of their payrolls. Upon performing experiment, we see that the NBA has a fluctuating relation. It is generally positive, but I would hesitate to say very common. The football league, however, is a completely different story. Very strong, very high correlation. You can see that every league individually still has a very high correlation. With even the Bundesliga, the lowest among these five, being much higher than the NBA's. Contrasting that, IPL has a completely fluctuating coefficient, which indicates to me that there seems to be no significant relation. And our esports representative, League of Legends, also has a high coefficient, though it should be noted that it has a much smaller sample size than the other sports being analyzed. Now, to confirm that the coefficients that we have obtained are not obtained through random chance, we have run Monte Carlo simulations, and from those simulations obtained 95% bootstrapped intervals of confidence. You can see that for the NBA, most points have their confidence interval not including a zero, making them statistically significant, and that in the point obtained Spearman coefficient lies well outside the null zone. The Football League is an even more drastic case of this, with it being far and away the clearest coefficient. IPL, however, shows us that this falls smack dab in the middle of our null zone, saying that there is no statistical significance of any relation we have observed. And finally, League of Legends, even with its smaller sample size, gives us a far more detailed correlation. Now, this relation becomes even more obvious when we observe what happens when we k-means cluster the given data. You can see that NBA falls mostly into three groups: those that tend to spend less, who can or cannot win, and then those who win a lot more while paying a lot more, those who win less. Football, the relation is stark when you look at this graph. Everyone falling into either low spend, low win or high spend, high win. The IPL is, again, as expected from our previous established randomness, there seems to be no clear correlation. Are any attempted K-means just creating as many groups as being tested for? League, again, with its smaller number of data points, still gives us a stronger correlation, though significant is tested. And finally, with our data, we construct a model through which we can see how efficient they are with their wages. From our established correlation coefficients, we can see how much a person spending this much is expected to win versus how much they have. We can see that there are many teams that spend a lot but do not win nearly as much as our correlation coefficient would lead you to believe. This tells the story that it's not just the money being spent that matters, it also tells you how it's being spent, ends up changing a lot.
Now we're going to look at the champion analysis of the various tournaments. Here we basically compare how the champions of each season of each tournament spend their money and see if the amount of money spent is an actual factor that determines if you win or not. So for NBA, we can see that the spending rate of the champions is distributed throughout the ranks of how much they've spent, meaning it is not does not show a high correlation of win percentages versus how much money they've spent. Whereas in the football leagues, it is very clear that if you spend more money, as is evident by the data, the team spending the most money on players have won the most number of leagues. This is because the football leagues have uncapped salaries, which means you can pay as much as you want for a player. IPL has a similar payment system to NBA where the salaries are ranked, and so we have a much uniform distribution where the amount of money spent is not a huge factor, or there's not a direct correlation between the uh, championship wins. For League of Legends, it's just five championships that we were comparing, and that does not provide us with a lot of data. So it's not conclusive, but it leans towards the same trend as spending more guarantees better players and thus better results. Now, to measure competitive balance, we have defined three ratios, three metrics. Now, Scully ratio, which measures the competitive balance by comparing how much they have won, how much teams win in the league, versus what the ideal league looks like. So, everyone having a 50% win rate. The Gini coefficient calculates the wage disparity among the players, among the teams, and the HHI index is an economic index which has been repurposed, which basically sees where the weight of the final concentration of the points lies, and higher uh, concentration points to a less competitive league. For NPA, the Knoll-Scully ratio is really high because the Knoll-Scully is not a perfect measure and it actually favors the leagues with more games. So with more games, the Knoll-Scully ratio goes up and up. Whereas for football, the Knoll-Scully ratio remains almost the same, but it has less than half the number of games in an NBA season. For IPL, the data is surprising as the Knoll-Scully ratio goes all over the place, saying that there isn't really a competitive imbalance present in the league. And for League of Legends, again, there isn't a lot of data, but we have calculated the Gini ratio and compared it to the standard deviation of the win rate. So to conclude, the first hypothesis, which claimed that the players who are more performing, or the players who get paid more, will be high performing, has some agreements with the data, but it's not perfectly deterministic, and we cannot say for sure that there is a direct correlation there. A second hypothesis takes an interesting turn where we get two separate conclusions. Where the null hypothesis, which is that they have no effect on each other, is somewhat true for leagues which have capped salaries, which means teams can only pay a certain amount to the players, whereas for leagues with the uncapped salaries, such as League of Legends uh, and the football leagues, the our hypothesis was confirmed, not confirmed, but we have high confidence in our hypothesis to be true, and it followed that for several years. Thank you.